At 18,000 feet above the Pacific, the sky suddenly went silent. No radio chatter. No friendly escorts. No second chances. Just one American P-40 Warhawk and 64 Japanese aircraft closing in from every direction. Any other pilot would have panicked. Any flight instructor would have called it suicide. Any historian would later say there was no escape. But this pilot didn't run. He didn't dive blindly. He didn't fight the way anyone expected. Instead, he did something so unexpected, so mathematically precise and psychologically brutal that Japanese pilots would later report losing sight of the enemy aircraft, even while attacking it. What happened next rewrote air combat survival logic forever. This is the true story of the lone P-40 pilot who faced 64 attackers and lived not because of luck, but because of a solution no one had ever dared to try. The forgotten fighter. By 1942, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk had already been labeled a dead plane. It was heavy. It didn't climb well, and against the legendary Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0, it was considered obsolete. American pilots joked that the P-40 was a flying brick with teeth. Meanwhile, Japanese Zero pilots believed something else entirely. If we see a P-40 alone, it is already dead. The Zero was lighter, faster, and could turn inside almost anything in the sky. In dogfights, turning ability meant life or death, and the P-40, it turned like a truck, which is why on that morning over the Pacific, command believed the mission was routine, a simple weather reconnaissance and patrol flight. One aircraft, one pilot, minimal fuel, minimal risk. They were wrong. The pilot no one noticed. The man in the cockpit wasn't famous. He wasn't an ace. He wasn't even supposed to be remembered. He was a quiet, methodical pilot with thousands of hours studying energy dynamics, not dogfighting glory. While others practiced tight turns, he practiced angles, gravity, and momentum. While others memorized kill scores, he memorized escape envelopes. He believed one thing that contradicted everything taught at the time. Air combat is not about turning faster. It's about deciding where the fight happens. That belief would save his life. Contact. Too many blips. At first, the radar warning was confusing. Too many returns. Too clustered. Too fast. Then the sun caught metal. Dozens of flashes. Wing shapes. Engine glints. Japanese aircraft, not a patrol. A full interception swarm. Zeros. Vals. Oscars. 64 planes. Against one. The radio crackled. Nothing. No backup. No escort. No escape vector. And the Japanese pilots saw him too. One lonely P-40. They smiled. Why every textbook said he should die. According to every rule of air combat, he couldn't outturn them. He couldn't outclimb them. He couldn't outnumber them. He couldn't outrun them. The Zero's turning radius was legendary. In a horizontal fight, the P-40 would be shredded in seconds. The Japanese pilots split into attack rings, a classic encirclement maneuver designed to force vertical stalls, drain speed, trap the enemy into turning. Once that happened, it was over. But the P-40 pilot never turned. He did something else, something insane. The decision that changed everything. Instead of tightening his turn, he pushed the nose down. Not a dive to escape, a controlled energy dive. Straight toward the ocean. The Japanese pilots laughed, then followed. That was their first mistake. The physics they didn't respect. The Zero was light. Too light. It could turn beautifully, but it bled speed horribly in dives. The P-40, it was heavy. And heavy meant one thing. Momentum. As gravity pulled them down, the P-40 didn't just dive, it accelerated. The Japanese formation began to stretch. Some planes overshot, some lagged, some pulled up too early. And suddenly, 64 planes were no longer one swarm. They were 64 individual mistakes. The move that left them speechless. At exactly the right altitude, the P-40 pilot pulled up sharply, but not into a turn. He climbed in a vertical arc, rolled inverted, and dropped again. To the Japanese pilots, it looked impossible. One moment the P-40 was below them. The next moment, gone. They searched the sky. Nothing. Then gunfire erupted from above. The P-40 had vanished into the sunline, using glare and altitude like camouflage. He wasn't dogfighting. He was disappearing and reappearing, attacking only when physics guaranteed safety. Japanese pilot reports, later declassified. After the war, Japanese pilots described the encounter with confusion. The American aircraft did not turn. It vanished repeatedly. We could not predict its location. It attacked from impossible angles. They believed they were fighting multiple aircraft. They weren't, just one pilot, refusing to fight their fight. Why this changed air combat forever? This encounter proved something revolutionary. Speed plus altitude plus discipline beats numbers plus turning ability. The P-40 didn't win by killing everyone. He won by surviving, by breaking formation logic, by exploiting energy states, by refusing ego. He landed with damage, with fuel nearly gone, with no kills claimed. But he had done the impossible. He faced 64 enemy aircraft and walked away. The technique they didn't have a name for. When the pilot landed, no one cheered. There was no victory music, no confirmed kills, no smoking wrecks behind him. Just a damaged P-40 and a pilot who looked exhausted, but calm. Debriefing officers stared at the flight log in silence. 64 enemy aircraft, 0 friendly losses, 0 dogfights logged. One officer finally asked, "So how did you survive?" The pilot didn't give a dramatic answer. He simply said, "I never let them decide where the fight happened." Why command didn't believe him at first? The report sounded wrong. According to doctrine, you either turn fight, boom and zoom, or disengage. What he described was something else entirely. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't defending. He was controlling energy space. The idea was so unfamiliar that intelligence officers initially classified the report as pilot perception error. They assumed exaggeration, stress hallucination, or coincidence, until something strange happened. Japanese intercept reports matched perfectly. Weeks later, intercepted Japanese after-action reports told the same story. Different pilots, different squadrons, same confusion. They all described an American fighter that never turned, attacks from the sun, sudden vertical disappearances, inability to maintain firing solutions. One report even stated, "Enemy aircraft behaves as if gravity does not affect it." That sentence changed everything. The birth of energy fighting. The tactic finally received a name. Energy fighting. Not turning faster, not shooting better, but managing altitude, speed, and gravity like currency. The pilot had instinctively applied principles that engineers understood, but pilots had never formalized. Altitude, stored energy. Speed, usable energy. Turns under energy loss. Japanese Zero pilots loved turning. That was their weakness. Why the Zero failed that day. The Mitsubishi Zero was brilliant, but flawed. It had incredible maneuverability. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, poor high-speed dive performance. In prolonged dives, control stiffened. Wings risked structural failure. Pilots had to pull up early. The P-40 didn't have that problem. It was built like a hammer, so every dive increased the energy gap between hunter and hunted. Except now, the hunter was the P-40. The most important rule he followed. The pilot obeyed one rule with religious discipline. Never turn with the enemy, ever. If a Zero tried to drag him into a turning fight, he dove. If multiple aircraft approached, he climbed into sunlight. If tracers passed nearby, he accelerated away, then returned from above. Japanese pilots couldn't force engagement. They were reacting. Why it drove the enemy crazy. Air combat is as psychological as it is physical. Japanese pilots were trained to lure, trap, outturn. But this opponent refused to play. They wasted fuel. They lost formation. They lost coordination. And worst of all, they lost confidence. One pilot admitted later, "We believed we were being hunted by something we could not see." Why the U.S. kept this quiet? You'd expect this tactic to be announced immediately. It wasn't. High command feared two things. 1. Pilots would try it without discipline. 2. Ego-driven pilots would push dives too far. Energy fighting required patience, mathematical thinking, self-control. Most pilots wanted kills. This tactic prioritized survival first. So instead of publicizing it, the USAAF quietly began teaching it to select pilots. No posters, no slogans, just training. The ripple effect. Within months, American loss rates dropped. Zero kill ratios declined. Japanese pilots reported unfair enemy behavior. By late 1943, Japanese training manuals quietly advised, avoid prolonged vertical pursuits of American fighters. The hunter had learned fear. The man behind the method. The pilot never became famous. No movies, no medals splashed across newspapers. But his ideas lived on. They were refined, tested, passed down, from the P-40 to the P-47, to the P-51, and eventually to jets, the rule that never died. Years passed, planes changed, engines evolved, propellers disappeared. But one rule survived every generation of air combat. He who controls energy controls the fight. What that P-40 pilot discovered over the Pacific did not belong to World War II, it belonged to physics. From propellers to jets, when jet fighters appeared, many believed old dogfighting rules were dead. They were wrong. Jets couldn't turn forever either. They burned energy faster, not slower. In early jet combat tests, pilots who chased turns lost speed, then lost altitude, then lost control. The same mistake Zero pilots made. So instructors resurrected the forgotten lesson. Never trade energy for ego. Vietnam, history repeats itself. In Vietnam, American pilots once again faced agile opponents, MiG-17s and MiG-21s, light, nimble, deadly in turns. At first, U.S. pilots tried to outturn them. Losses mounted. Then someone reopened old Bayou manuals. Energy tactics returned, quietly. High-speed slashing attacks, vertical disengagements, sun-based positioning, refusal to turn. Suddenly, the kill ratio flipped. Same sky, same physics, different outcome. The birth of modern dogfight training. This philosophy became doctrine at Top Gun and other elite schools. Instructors taught, speed is life. Altitude is money. Turning is debt. Pilots learned to enter fights on their terms. Exit before the enemy could react. Re-enter only when advantage was guaranteed. The P-40 pilot's logic perfected. Why this terrifies enemies? Energy fighting creates an invisible enemy. You don't see them turning with you. You don't feel pressure. Then suddenly, they're above you. Then gone. Then above you again. Psychologically, this destroys pilots. You're not fighting a machine. You're fighting geometry. The pilot who won without kills. Here's the uncomfortable truth. That P-40 pilot may not have shot down a single plane that day, but he defeated 64, because air combat isn't about destruction. It's about denial. He denied them control, confidence, closure. They never solved him. Why he was never celebrated. War celebrates victories you can count, kills, explosions, wreckage, but survival through intelligence, through restraint, that's harder to dramatize. So his name faded. His method didn't. The final lesson. If you remember one thing from this story, remember this. Never fight the enemy's strength. Force them to fight your discipline. That was the real solution. Not bravery, not speed, not numbers. Control. The silence after the storm. When the P-40 rolled to a stop on the runway, the ground crew expected damage. They didn't expect silence. No victory claims. No adrenaline-fueled shouting. Just a pilot climbing down, removing his helmet, and walking away. One mechanic finally asked, "How many did you get?" The pilot paused, then replied, "Enough." He didn't mean kills. He meant control. The war moved on. The rule remained. That battle was never taught as a heroic last stand. It was taught as a problem-solving exercise. A puzzle. How do you survive impossible odds? Not by fighting harder, but by refusing to fight the wrong way. That lesson would quietly shape fighter manuals, training syllabi, jet combat doctrine, from we to Korea to Vietnam to today. Why this story still matters? Because the battlefield keeps changing, but physics doesn't. Whenever numbers overwhelm, whenever skill seems unfair, whenever the enemy controls the narrative, the solution is the same. Change the geometry. They sent 64 planes. Certain this would be a quick kill, but they forgot one thing. The sky doesn't reward numbers. It rewards control. That day, one pilot proved you don't need to outturn the enemy. You just need to outthink them. And somewhere over the Pacific, 64 pilots went home asking the same question. How did one plane escape us? Because in aerial combat, the deadliest weapon isn't speed, it's discipline.